At the New Orleans Convention Center, Adam Schiff took the stage with a confident demeanor, as if the entire debate was already in his grasp, but what he didn't anticipate was John Kennedy quietly exposing every buried truth. Until Schiff could no longer hold his ground, the atmosphere in the auditorium was taut as a boring, not the excitement of a concert or a sports final, but a heavy, calculated tension. Whispers filled the room. Cameramen checked their lenses one last time, and political advisors seemed to be bracing for a moment that could shift the entire landscape before diving into the story. Comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Backstage, Senator John Kennedy sat alone in a cold waiting room. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his reading glasses perched low on his nose, but his posture was composed. His hands gently cradled a worn stack of files on his lap. The stack wasn't thick, but it held weighty documents. He glanced at the TV screen on the wall. The network was counting down live. The debate would start in 7 minutes. Down the hall, Adam Schiff made his entrance. He commanded attention in his usual way, a booming laugh, handshakes with strangers, and a quip about Louisiana's blazing stage lights. His team trailed quietly behind, some trying to look important, others just hoping to avoid a scolding. In Kennedy's room, the air was cooler, calmer. His campaign manager, Michael, poked his head in. "Ready, Senator?" Kennedy looked up. "I've been ready for a while." Michael nodded, stepped inside, and closed the door. "You sure you want to dig into this tonight?" Kennedy didn't answer immediately. He ran his finger along the edge of the file stack. "People forget what he's done," he said. "But those he's hurt never do. They live with it." Michael sighed. "We've got 2 hours to get through. Don't let him drag you into a circus." Kennedy smiled. "If he wants a circus, let him. I've got the congressional record." In the main hall, hundreds of seats were filled to capacity. Right on time, the moderator stepped to the podium. "Good evening, Louisiana, and welcome to the national debate broadcast live across the country tonight. We have Senator Adam Schiff and Senator John Kennedy." Applause erupted, quick and loud for both. Schiff strode out, waving and flashing 2 thumbs up. Kennedy followed, calm but confident, offering only a nod to the crowd at his podium. He set the stack of files down gently, as if it were fragile. He didn't glance at it. The moderator announced the format: 2 hours, alternating responses, no interruptions. Schiff raised an eyebrow at this, then smirked at the audience. They chuckled. Kennedy didn't react. His eyes scanned the crowd, his expression unreadable. "Senator Kennedy," the moderator said, "what do you think is the greatest failure of the American political system today?" Kennedy responded, his lips barely moving. "Political failure rarely starts with the people. It starts at the top, with decisions behind closed doors, deals that benefit a few, leaving the rest to patch up the consequences." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need the weight of his words hung in the air a beat too long. Schiff jumped in. "Come on, the greatest failure is letting people like him stand here pretending to understand governance. I've defended democracy, worked for millions. What's he done? Just talk." Some in the audience laughed, others glanced at their phones. Kennedy didn't flinch, didn't blink. He let the noise pass, then leaned slightly toward the mic and said, "You defend democracy, but you've also heard it sometimes in the very actions you're proud of." The moderator cleared their throat, moving to the next question, but the air had already shifted from the outset. Adam Schiff did what he always excelled at, commanding the room with overwhelming confidence. He leaned forward, interrupted frequently, laughed heartily at his own jokes, and painted every topic in broad strokes. "We once had the strongest democracy, then it was undermined. Everyone knows that you've lived through it," he said, pointing at the audience like a coach during a halftime pep talk. "You don't need a lecture from someone who just reads from desk papers." The crowd roared in response, just as Schiff's team had hoped. John Kennedy stood still, hands clasped on his podium, unruffled. When his turn came, he held his ground, focusing on facts: stagnant wages, election instability, and disproportionate harm in rural and minority communities. But Schiff wouldn't have it. "Look at him reading from his stack. How cute. You don't run a country with papers, you do it with guts," he said. The audience reacted again, this time less enthusiastically. A few chuckled, others whispered to each other. The mood had shifted, not enough to unsettle Schiff, but just enough for Kennedy's next words to cut sharper. "You can use guts," he calmly replied, "but without reason you'll lead the country off a cliff." A moment of silence, then applause erupted. The moderator intervened, steering the discussion back to leadership, ethics, and accountability. Schiff seized the chance to attack what he called witch hunts, false accusations, and fabricated stories. He rattled off a long list of grievances, as if reading from a roster of enemies. He mentioned the FBI social media bans and a few lawsuits he deemed utterly baseless. Then, almost offhandedly, he said something that made Kennedy look up, not overtly but enough for the cameras to catch. "I've settled a few things because it was easier, not because I was wrong," Schiff said, waving a hand. "Sometimes you just cut a check and move on. Big politicians do it all the time. It means nothing." That one sentence rang like an alarm bell for Kennedy. He lifted his hand from the podium, lightly touching the stack of files. He didn't open it, just let his fingers rest on the cover. The moderator pressed on Senator Kennedy. Do you think compromising behavior matters for a public official's ethics? Kennedy could have given a short answer, but he didn't. He looked at the moderator, then the audience, and finally straight into the camera. I think most folks don't have the luxury of settling things quietly, he said. If your landlord raises rent, you don't have a legal team, you take the hit. If your boss cuts hours, there's no press release, you tighten your belt. So when someone like him treats a compromise like a receipt, yes, I think that matters. No shouting, no theatrics, just raw honesty, the kind people don't forget. Schiff tried to cut in, but the moderator stopped him. Senator Schiff, you'll have your chance next. Schiff's face shifted just slightly, but if you looked closely you'd see it, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. The audience noticed too. From there, Schiff's remark started to miss the mark. He mocked the idea of systemic inequality, getting mixed reactions. He accused the moderator of bias. Some in the audience glared. He called Kennedy just an angry voice chasing fame. And that's when things turned. A middle-aged man in a blue jacket, front row, holding a baseball cap, stood up and walked out, not rushed, not angry, just done. His seat stayed empty. Kennedy noticed, but didn't react. He didn't need to, because the focus was gradually shifting to him, not because he was loud or showy, but because he was steady, consistent, forcing the room to think. And he knew the moment was coming, but first the country needed to hear a name long forgotten. Kennedy had barely moved since the debate began. While Schiff performed, he conserved his energy, observing, listening, waiting. Now it was his turn. The moderator asked about trust in government and how leadership should respond to restore it. Kennedy adjusted his mic, took a breath, and began with a voice that didn't need to compete with Schiff's volume. My father ran a grocery store in Baton Rouge. He didn't have big ambitions, didn't use fancy words, but when he sold you something you knew it was worth it. That's trust. People are hurt by empty promises from Washington, and I carry that lesson every time I vote, every time I speak. The room went quiet. Even Schiff's side paused. He had everyone's attention. My father never really recovered. John Kennedy continued, his voice low and steady. He worked until his legs gave out, and I carry that memory every time I vote, every time I speak, every time I see someone struggling to survive while others sit on power they don't deserve, manipulating to get it. He didn't blink as he turned to Adam Schiff. Some of us don't have the option to cut a check and move on. Schiff shifted, crossing his arms. For the first time he looked away. Kennedy leaned in slightly. I remember a man named David who worked on a project in California you backed. He lost his job because of regulations. You pushed. His requests for help were ignored, and when he sued you dragged it out until he ran out of money. David took a settlement on the condition he'd stay silent. But I'm not David, and I can speak. The moderator flinched. Schiff sank back, trying to guess where Kennedy got that name. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Kennedy opened his stack of files, not wide, just enough to pull out a single copy, a worn legal document. He held it in one hand. I've read dozens of cases like David's, he said. Real people, real pain buried under settlements, memos, and legal fees they couldn't afford. Each case tells a story about how power is used not to build but to silence. He didn't raise his voice. He let the names keep ringing. Mary, New Orleans administrative worker fired while on sick leave. Thomas, Baton Rouge, contracted to renovate a community center, underpaid, settled for half the amount. Sarah, Shreveport, discriminated against after reporting unsafe work conditions, settled with a gag clause so tight it nearly ruined her career. He looked at the moderator. You asked about leadership in a crisis. Here's the truth: when someone shows who they are in closed rooms with no cameras, that's who they'll bring to the floor of Congress. Schiff gave a forced laugh, trying to brush it off. Come on, everyone has disputes. You think he's never signed anything to hush someone up? Welcome to politics. He turned to the audience. You think he hasn't? Kennedy didn't respond. He looked at the crowd. There's a difference between hushing someone and crushing them. Most folks know that feeling, being told to move on, to forget, to endure and stay silent. The atmosphere had shifted now, not dramatic, but profound. The way truth seeps into a room, and you can't pretend not to see it. A woman in the fourth row, about 40, wearing a red sweater, nodded slowly. She hadn't clapped all evening, but her eyes never left Kennedy. For the first time, Schiff looked like he couldn't predict what was coming. The moderator tried to regain control. Senator Kennedy, are you saying these cases directly impact Senator Schiff's political decisions? Kennedy didn't hesitate. I'm saying when you get used to using silence as currency, it changes how you see people. If you treat workers as disposable in politics, don't be surprised when you treat them the same in governance. No applause, no cheers, just a heavy, attentive silence. But Kennedy hadn't fully opened his stack of files, and he was only getting started. The moderator shifted in their chair, clearly torn between keeping the program on track and recognizing something was unfolding, something not neatly contained in tonight's script. Kennedy placed the document he just read face down on the podium. He didn't stack it with the others. He left it there like a marker. John Kennedy opened a page in his files, his eyes scanning quickly to find the right passage. He found it and looked up. Mark was a staffer on the House Intelligence Committee you chaired in 2019. He sent an internal email warning that the committee was pushing a Trump-Russia connection narrative without clear evidence. Mark was told to stay quiet. Then lost his job, his life fell apart, family, finances. Everything. He glanced at Schiff. Mark's community in Oakland blamed him for the committee's failure. He lost his job, his home, and eventually his health. The room was silent. Schiff leaned toward the mic. I don't know this person, and if there was a mistake, maybe he didn't do his job right. You can't pin every political failure on me. That's how Washington works. Kennedy didn't flinch. No, that's how you work. He held up a copy of an old Oakland Tribune article. Headline: Congressional staffer fired after objecting to committee decision. Nobody remembers this, he said, because it didn't happen in New York or DC. It happened in a small corner most folks don't visit, but it happened, and the damage lasts long after the cameras leave. The moderator tried to pivot. Senator Kennedy, are these isolated cases or not isolated? Kennedy cut in, his voice firm. They're ignored, and I haven't even mentioned the veterans. The word veterans landed like a punch. Schiff shifted again, his hand touching his water bottle. He took a quick sip. Kennedy pulled out another set of documents marked with colored tabs. A project in Fresno, California, backed by policies you supported, involved a non-profit helping veterans recover from substance abuse and PTSD. That group had a temporary land lease contract. He paused. You terminated that contract 6 months early, saying the land needed redevelopment, promising to relocate the program. You didn't. Half of them ended up in shelters. 3 died within months. One was Henry. He looked straight into the camera. His son is watching tonight. The room seemed to freeze. Schiff blinked. Kennedy placed the document beside the others, forming a small quiet stack. These aren't mistakes, he said. This is a pattern. Schiff leaned toward the mic, his voice lower. You don't know the full story behind those decisions. You pick a few documents and try to make me the villain. Thousands have benefited from my work. Kennedy kept his tone steady. I'm not trying to make you a villain, I'm just making the victims visible. For a second nothing moved. Then a murmur spread through the room. Not anger, not applause, just reflection. A young man near the back of the room stood up, whispered something to the person next to him, and left. Not angry, not loud, just gone. The moderator glanced at their notes, clearly unsure how to proceed. Senator Schiff, would you like to respond before we move to the next segment? Schiff waved it off. Keep going. He wants to talk about old disputes. I want to talk about the future. Nobody cares about congressional drama from years ago. Kennedy raised an eyebrow. Tell that to Henry's son. He didn't need to say more, but what was coming would make it impossible for Schiff to feign indifference. The stack of files was now half as thick, but each page Kennedy sat down felt like a stone weighing on the entire room. He didn't raise his voice or dramatize, but the air grew heavy, as if everyone was leaning forward unconsciously. Even the moderator, usually quick to interrupt for time, stayed silent. Kennedy placed both hands on the podium, looked at the audience, and asked, how many of you have signed something without fully understanding it? Dozens of hands went up, not in protest, but from lived experience. He nodded slightly. Most folks don't have lawyers to read every line. They don't have advisors, no loopholes, no PR team. And when it falls apart, they don't land softly, they crash, and they stay down. Adam Schiff snorted louder this time. Come on, he's turning this debate into a tear-jerker. This is about leadership, not sad stories. But no one laughed along. John Kennedy reached into his stack, pulling out a thick set of documents, bound reports, memos, and printed emails. He held them up. This is from a project in Shreveport, Louisiana, tied to a policy you backed. A community relocation program heavily promoted, got over 80 families to sign up, many selling their homes to prepare for the move. He flipped through the pages. Then the funding dried up, the partner pulled out, and you were gone. The land still vacant. Those 80 families, many never got their deposits back. Some were too exhausted to sue, others couldn't afford to. One man died still trying to get his money back. His daughter is here tonight. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Schiff stared across the stage, his voice slowed. That project wasn't directly under my control. That was a local decision. If someone mismanaged funds, it's not my fault. Kennedy turned slightly. You campaigned for the project, you spoke about it on TV, you put your name on the billboards. But when it collapsed, you vanished. That's the pattern. You take credit for the promise, abandon the reality. Schiff didn't reply. Kennedy kept pulling from the stack. This, he said, is a transcript from a 2019 hearing in Sacramento. Under oath, you were asked if you knew about complaints tied to a policy you pushed. You answered, I quote, "That's not my problem, that's for local agencies." He paused, letting the words sink in. Leadership isn't blaming others when it's convenient. Leadership is taking responsibility, especially when it's hard. Someone in the second row clapped once, then twice, then stopped, maybe unsure if it was allowed. But it didn't matter. The shift had begun. Schiff tried to regain his footing. Every politician, every leader lets someone down. Sometimes that's life. That's the cost of making decisions. Kennedy leaned closer to the mic. No, that's the cost of how you make decisions. He pulled the final item from the stack, an email. It was printed in black and white, corner slightly curled. This is from Nathan, a former staffer on your team at the Intelligence Committee. He wrote this email warning that the committee was exaggerating Trump-Russia evidence for political gain. Nathan was fired soon after he set the email down. Slowly, Nathan died, kidney failure, couldn't afford treatment. His wife now works as a hotel receptionist 3 blocks from here. Schiff shifted his face. Didn't flush it, pal. Dead. The moderator spoke up, voice strained. We should take a break. But Kennedy cut in first. No, he turned to the audience. People like Nathan don't get breaks. They work until they're spent. They trust until they're forced to stop. And this man wants you to vote for him, wants you to forget all this. But I don't forget, and I won't let anyone pretend it never happened. The moderator nodded slowly, well moved to closing statements. Now Schiff leaned back, adjusted his suit jacket, tried to force a smile, but it didn't land on the podium. Kennedy's nearly depleted stack of files lay quietly, its work nearly done, but the pressure was about to erupt stronger than anyone expected. Schiff placed both hands on the podium, fingers tapping the wood, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, as if trying to find a rhythm to cling to, but he was losing control, and Kennedy hadn't even touched the mic yet. The moderator turned to him. Senator Schiff, would you like to respond? Schiff inhaled, opened his mouth, and began. Look, I've served this country more than most would dare to dream. There are always a few who feel shortchanged. That's the price of success. Sometimes things aren't perfect, but I've defended democracy, made decisions, and left a bigger mark than anyone in this game. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. He reached for his water bottle again. John Kennedy kept his gaze steady, calm. His stack of files now lay flat on the podium, nothing left to pull out. He didn't need more. The weight of what he'd already said was doing its work. Adam Schiff pressed on. What you've heard tonight is just a curated list of stories. You think I'm the only one who's been sued. You think other politicians don't make tough calls. I've defended democracy, brought opportunities to places nobody else cared about. That's what matters. He paused a bit too long. And this attempt to make me the villain, it's just political theater. That's all it is. It's desperation. He's desperate. He's trying to build his name on my back. He turned to the audience. You see through it, don't you? But the crowd didn't respond. Some stared, others looked down. A man rubbed his hands, whispering something to the woman next to him. She didn't answer. The moderator tried to salvage things. Let's move to closing statements, starting with Senator Kennedy. But before Kennedy could speak, Schiff cut in this time faster, less composed. I've been attacked my whole life. Fake news, biased courts, politicians like him who build nothing but slogans. You know what they're scared of. That's why they target me, because I'm not like them. I don't play their game. I don't bow. He raised a hand, gripping the podium's edge. His voice trembled, not with anger, not with confidence, but with something else. Then he faltered just slightly, a half step back, as if losing balance. His left hand grabbed for the podium, but missed its center. His body tilted off kilter. The moderator froze. Kennedy's face didn't change, but his eyes flicked too. Schiff's ate off stage. Schiff exhaled sharply, then staggered sideways. A faint "oh" rose from the second row. The cameras kept rolling, and Aide in a blue suit rushed on stage, whispering something urgently. Schiff waved him off, his hand shaking, but the message was clear. He was no longer in control, not of the narrative, not of the room, and not of himself. The moderator's voice dropped. Senator, would you like to step backstage? Schiff blinked, sweat beading his face, lost its usual color. He adjusted his suit jacket as if that could fix something, then stepped back too quickly, catching himself on the railing behind the podium. The audience was utterly silent, and the cameras stayed live. Another aide wearing a headset rushed over. They flanked him, gently guiding him toward the curtain. His movements were stiff, his breathing audible at the edge of the curtain. He turned not to the audience, not to the moderator, but to Kennedy. Kennedy didn't flinch, didn't move. Schiff held his gaze too long, as if wanting to say something but unable to find the words. Then he disappeared behind the curtain. A wave of murmur spread through the crowd, but no one knew what to do. The moderator tried to regain the mood. We'll take a brief pause while Senator Schiff is checked on. Thank you for your patience. The broadcast stayed live, and Kennedy, he reached down, closing his stack of files. No theatrics, just a quiet end to a long chain of silences. He glanced at the audience, then at the moderator. I'm ready to finish my statement, he said, but the nation was already reacting, and this moment was far from over. Kennedy stood at his podium as the backstage crew scrambled. No background music, no announcements, just the lingering quiet of something that would be remembered forever. The staffer stepped onto the stage, whispering into the moderator's earpiece. The moderator nodded, then cleared their throat. We've been informed that Senator Schiff is receiving medical attention. The debate will not continue. Thank you for your understanding. A low hum of conversation rippled through the crowd like static crackling. No one stood up right away. They seemed unsure if the debate was truly over, or just paused. John Kennedy didn't leave. He took a breath, then spoke. I didn't come here to make anyone stumble. I came because too many have already fallen. The camera stayed on him. I didn't spend weeks preparing this file to create a moment like this. I did it because someone has to speak the truth where it can't be edited or buried in fine print. The words hit hard. They didn't feel rehearsed. They felt like the words of someone letting raw conviction override restraint. Then he stepped away from the podium, quietly walking toward his team waiting off stage. As he disappeared behind the curtain, his mic caught his final words to Michael, his campaign manager. That was the moment, not the stumble, not the collapse, not the exit from the stage. That was it. By the time Kennedy reached the dressing room, the video had spread to dozens of X accounts and multiple YouTube reaction channels. Some called it the Kennedy moment, others the collapse, but the core was the same. Clips of Kennedy recounting the stories were replayed endlessly, especially the one about the veteran and the daughter who never got her refund. TikTok was flooded with edits, some dramatic, some Sarcastic, some quietly respectful. Even those who didn't watch the debate saw screenshots, quotes, and 15-second clips of Schiff being escorted off stage while Kennedy stood motionless behind late-night shows. Quickly pivoted, one host joked. When someone says the truth will set you free, they don't usually mean off the stage, but the tone on most other channels less humorous, more stunned. On Fox News, a former senator said, "It wasn't just a political moment, it was a reckoning." MSNBC's late-night panel was split. One commentator called it a calculated character assassination, another simply said, "He didn't attack, he exposed." CNN focused on Schiff's condition, some suggesting overload, others hinting at heat exhaustion, but even among loyal viewers the comments were hard to ignore. Posts like, "I used to support him but I can't defend tonight, why didn't he answer about the veterans?" Kennedy didn't yell, didn't mock, he just spoke, and I listened. Even veteran commentators who made a living poking fun at conservative politicians admitted on air that Kennedy didn't come off as angry or preachy, just prepared. By midnight, Kennedy's phone had 92 missed calls. His inbox crashed. Messages poured in from staff, old friends, a pastor in Baton Rouge, and a woman from Fresno who wrote, "Thank you for naming Henry, my brother worked with him." Kennedy sat alone on a bench outside the venue staring at the concrete floor. Michael handed him a jacket. "They're lining up for interviews." Fox, NBC, even PBS. Kennedy said nothing, they'll turn it into a circus. Michael warned, "Focus on the collapse, the drama." Kennedy nodded slowly. "Then we keep the focus on the people, the ones no one let speak." Michael gave a small smile. "I don't think you need to worry about that anymore." Kennedy looked up. Why? Michael showed him the screen, a message from a major newspaper editor. "You didn't just show up, you changed the conversation." But Kennedy didn't care about the conversation, he still carried the weight of a promise. The ride back to the hotel in New Orleans was quiet. Kennedy sat in the back of a plain black SUV, the kind rented on a campaign budget, not flashy, just enough to get him from one place to the next. Outside the window, the Louisiana night slid by. Convenience stores, gas stations, a closed pawn shop with a flickering sign, nothing remarkable, but the silence in the car was heavy. His phone kept buzzing. Michael had turned off notifications an hour ago, but the screen still lit up every few seconds with interview requests, support messages, and a few threats. Kennedy stared straight ahead. "Want to do a debrief now or wait till morning?" Michael asked from the front seat. "No debrief," John Kennedy replied. "I just want to think." The driver pulled into the lot of a small hotel on Canal Street, older than its online photos, but clean. Kennedy had stayed here once before as Louisiana's treasurer, fighting over budget issues. The hotel lobby was quiet. A young woman at the front desk nodded at him, eyes wide, as if unsure whether to say something. Kennedy returned a small smile, said nothing, and followed Michael toward the elevator in his room. Kennedy shrugged off his suit jacket. Tossing it onto an armchair, he kicked off his shoes, sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled, not a sigh of relief, but the kind you let out when the room stops spinning and the noise quiets enough to think. Michael stepped in, tablet under his arm. Emails from ABC Times, Picayune, and a local paper in Shreveport. "They want interviews tomorrow morning. I said we'd respond later." Kennedy nodded, barely listening. He looked at his hands. They were steady now, but earlier backstage, right after Schiff's collapse, they had trembled, not from fear or nerves, but from something deeper. "You okay?" Michael asked. Kennedy looked up. His eyes weren't wet, but they were heavy. "You remember the story I told you about my cousin?" he asked. Michael thought the one about losing the store. "No, the other one." Kennedy pulled a worn photo from his wallet, its edges frayed. The image faded. A man stood in front of a grocery store, holding a little girl, both untouched by the world. "This is Jimmy. He ran a shop in Monroe, crushed by regulations from a policy shift back. This was before he got famous, before the committees. Jimmy worked hard, opened early, closed late. Then the financial support stopped." He flipped the photo over. On the back in faint blue ink, Jimmy and Lily Summer. "Before the store closed, they cut the subsidies, said the project wasn't viable." Jimmy called, sent letters to Schiff's office, no response. By the time he got a lawyer, the project had a new name, the paperwork was gone. He lost the store, lost his house, started drinking. Wife left. Michael sat beside him, quiet. "That little girl," Kennedy pointed, "is Mary. She's a single mom now, scraping by in Lafayette. She never had a chance. And Jimmy, he died in a rented apartment above a hardware store. No one came to the funeral except me and the guy who used to fix his car." He folded the photo, clucked it back into his wallet. "So when I say this isn't politics, I mean it. This isn't about parties or headlines, it's about people like Jimmy. Every time someone says I'm dramatic or too conservative, I think about how many Jimmys are out they're still waiting for someone to say their name." Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You said it pretty clearly tonight." Kennedy shook his head. "I didn't say it loud, I just didn't let it stay buried." They sat in silence, only the soft hum of the air conditioner. Michael stood, grabbing the remote. "Want to watch the news?" Kennedy shook his head again. "No, I know what it looks like, just hope they see what matters." He grabbed the hotel notepad from the desk, scribbled something, and tucked it into the file stack by the bed. Kennedy woke before dawn. His phone on the nightstand was still buzzing intermittently. He didn't touch it, not yet. He pulled the curtains, stood barefoot on the carpet, and looked out at New Orleans stretching under the dim morning light for a few minutes. There was no debate, no headlines, just the world waking up. He turned on the faucet, splashed water on his face, and looked in the mirror. He didn't look powerful, he looked tired, worn, but deep in his eyes there was clarity. When Michael knocked holding a coffee, the news cycle was already in overdrive. They're calling it the most consequential political moment of the decade, Michael said, handing him the cup. And I think they're just getting started. John Kennedy raised an eyebrow. Who's they? Michael grinned, opening his tablet. Take your pick. He pulled up 3 tabs: Fox News, CBS, and The Times. Pick a un all. Led with the same image, Kennedy at his podium. Files open, eyes steady, Schiff stumbling, supported by an aide in the background. No caption needed. I don't want the collapse to be the story, Kennedy said, sipping the coffee. I want it to be about the people. It's both, Michael replied. But your story is taking root. He turned the screen, showing Kennedy an unexpected message from a senior producer at Face the Nation, offering a full segment on Sunday. Below it, a direct message from a woman named Linda. I'm Henry's son. You said my dad's name. I didn't think anyone would. Just wanted to say thank you. I cried last night. I think my dad would be proud to be remembered. Kennedy stared at the message for a long time. His hand didn't move. Then he whispered he should never have been forgotten. The campaign communications director called soon after. The usual chatter. Interview offers, potential endorsements, even cautious outreach from the opposition. People who once ignored calls now proposed collaborations. And building something bold. Kennedy left it to Michael to handle. His mind was elsewhere. By mid-morning, he requested a short statement, no long speech, no Q&A, just honest. A local news crew met him in the hotel's back courtyard. He wore a plain white dress shirt and slacks. No podium, no files, just him. He looked straight into the camera. Last night wasn't about political victory, it wasn't about a moment, it was about people. Working people told their pain doesn't matter. I didn't plan for that to happen, but I'm not surprised. The weight of truth finally shook something loose. He paused. We can't keep pretending silence is strength or looking away as leadership. If we want better, we have to call things by their name, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Then he stepped back, nodded to the cameraman, and walked away. He didn't need applause. He wasn't performing. Back in the hotel room, another message arrived from a man in Mississippi. His wife, a social worker, had worked for a program shift back near Jackson. They lost everything when the project collapsed. He'd never told the full story until now. Kennedy read the message 3 times, then replied briefly, I'm listening, always listening. Michael looked up from his phone. You know, you could run for anything. Kennedy gave a small smile. I just want people to stop being trampled and forgotten. Michael sat down across from him. Then maybe that's exactly why you should run. By evening, John Kennedy finally had a moment alone. His team had gone out for dinner, leaving him a rare pause before the next wave of interviews. The TV in the room was muted, endlessly replaying news from the previous night. Commentators from both sides argued over what it meant, while analysts rewound and replayed the footage like it was a last-second goal in a championship game. Kennedy didn't watch. He sat at the small desk, flipping through printed emails and handwritten letters, hurriedly forwarded by campaign staff. Most were predictable: supporters, critics, journalists chasing angles. He skimmed, setting them aside. Then an envelope caught his eye. It was addressed in pencil in childish handwriting with no return address. The campaign office had forwarded it on the back in clumsy block letters. Mom told me to write to the man who tells the truth. Kennedy opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a letter written in bright blue ink on notebook paper with a clumsy drawing of stars and a big heart at the top. Dear Mr. John, my name is Mia. I'm 10 years old. Mom told me to watch you last night, even though it was a grown-up show, because you were brave and didn't yell. She says that's rare. I like that you didn't talk to hurt people. You talked like you had to tell the truth. My dad used to work at a place that didn't pay him for 2 months. We had to move. Mom cried a lot. I want to thank you. I think you stood up for people like us. Love, Mia. Kennedy didn't cry. He just stared at the letter, rereading it, letting each word land like the quiet pulse of something deeper than politics, bigger than the noise. He folded the letter, placed it gently beside the photo of his cousin Jimmy, and leaned back in the chair. The hotel room buzzed. Michael texted 7 million views from official sources alone. It's on every channel. But Kennedy only glanced at it. He'd been on air before, given speeches face down powerful people. But this was different, not because a man stumbled on stage, but because a girl named Mia watched and saw something worth writing about. Kennedy picked up a pen, scribbled on the hotel notepad, not a reply to the letter. Mia left no address, but something to carry with him. The truth isn't the loudest voice, it's the one still standing when others fall. He tucked the note into his briefcase, right behind the worn stack of files. That stack, now tattered and empty, wasn't put away. He planned to carry it everywhere, not as a trophy, but as a reminder, because the truth wasn't just in the documents, it was in the names: Jimmy, Henry, Nathan, Mary, Thomas, and Mia. John Kennedy didn't set out to take anyone down. He wanted to speak for those who never got the mic, for losses that didn't make the papers, for stories silenced by hush agreements, legal Memos and shame. He knew this moment might fade, the media would soon pivot, but he also knew something real had taken root. People were paying attention differently now. A country tired of noise had heard a voice that didn't shout, and that mattered. The story of John Kennedy exposing Adam Schiff's hidden truths during the New Orleans debate reflects a deeper issue in American society today: the lack of transparency and accountability from those in power. Through Kennedy's use of a stack of files containing emails, reports, and stories of people like David Henry or Nathan, people impacted by Schiff's political decisions, the story underscores that truth, however painful, has the power to shake the walls of power. Mia's letter from a 10-year-old girl who felt the sincerity in Kennedy's words shows that honest actions can inspire across generations. In the context of 2025 America, where political debates are often dominated by polarization and misinformation, this story teaches a vital lesson: seek the truth and speak up for the forgotten. Every American, whether an office worker or a student, can apply this lesson by questioning leaders' decisions, verifying information through reliable sources, and supporting overlooked communities like the veterans or working families in the story. Instead of letting stories like Jimmy's, a man who lost his store to unfair policies, be buried, we need to remember and act, whether through voting or joining community movements. Kennedy didn't need to shout, he used truth to speak, and Mia heard him. The lesson is clear: honesty, persistence, and compassion can change how a nation faces itself, starting with the small actions of each person. Thank you for following this story about truth and accountability. Subscribe to join us in exploring more meaningful stories. See you in the next video, where we'll keep giving a voice to people like Mia. And thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.